Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Jim. Hi, Matt Lawson. I run my own company, Downstream Innovation, which is an innovation consultancy. But today I'm representing VRtuoso, who are one of the companies that I work for and support, as Jim said. So what I'm going to talk about today is VR in learning and development. So I'll give a bit of a history on VR because it's come an awful long way over quite a long time. I'll talk about how the market has really changed in terms of VR and VR learning and development over the last couple of years. I'll talk about some of the benefits that can be gained from using VR in learning and training. We'll talk about some of the pain points and barriers that have prevented up to this point virtual reality being adopted en masse for training and development applications. I'll then talk through VRtuoso and their solution to the barriers and pain points that we'll look at. And then I'll talk through some industry use cases, and I'll talk as well about some specific examples that I'm doing with organizations around the world at the moment. And then, as Jim says, there'll be time for some Q&A at the end. So a very quick history then on virtual reality. And virtual reality as a concept first sort of emerged back in the 1980s. This idea that you could go into some sort of virtually simulated approximation of the real world, and it was mostly sci-fi at the time. So films like Tron or The Lawnmower Man kind of brought to life this vision of being able to enter these virtual worlds that were controlled from the real world, but you were essentially immersed in this virtual environment. So mostly sci-fi back in the 80s. Then in the 90s, it began to gain some adoption and credibility in real world scenarios, in particular in the gaming space. What I'm showing here is towards the end of that decade. This is a project I led for BT at the Millennium Dome, and it was scanning in people in a world first scanning booth. So you got into this booth and we scanned you 3D and created a virtual reality character of you that we then put into games and movie scenes. So purely for entertainment purposes, but beginning to show the potential of the technology. Then we move into the 2000s up to 2010, and people, particularly corporates now, began to become aware of virtual reality and the opportunities that it presented, and they started to dabble. And I suppose the best example of that through that decade was Second Life. So this was a whole virtual world where you could create the world, you could build buildings, you could build anything essentially in this world. And many corporates started to get into that space and started to create their own exhibition areas and their own offices in that space, but ultimately didn't really go anywhere because nobody could actually see the real benefit of doing it. And then over the last decade, 2010 to 2020, we've began to see the real use cases and the real applications of virtual reality emerging in industry. So things like construction, design, mechanics, that kind of thing, where having a virtual representation of the thing that you're creating from scratch is really quite a powerful thing. And if we look at the tech adoption curve, so this is the classic tech adoption curve that most technologies go through. As I said, it's been a long journey from the early 80s all the way through to now 2020. But what's happened, particularly over the last 3 years, is that virtual reality has really begun to explode, and in particular in 2 or 3 particular markets as well. So let's just quickly rewind to 2018. So at the time, VR was sort of gradually going up that slope of enlightenment, and people were beginning to find the use cases for it. But actually, the market was still quite small globally, $6 billion globally, which actually is pretty small. And you'll see from the little chart there as well that the vast majority of that market was around consumer VR. So essentially VR for gaming, that kind of thing. But then something strange happened. Between 2018 and 2020. So these are one of a huge set of results that were done by a survey that was done by Reuters, 750 companies globally, asking them for their opinions on virtual reality and also other augmented reality and mixed reality solutions as well. And what you'll see here is that quite a lot of organizations suddenly started prioritizing virtual reality, and particularly virtual reality for enterprise applications. And when you drill down into the data and you look at why they're prioritizing it, these were the spaces that it was anticipated that it would deliver benefit. So product design and prototyping, workforce project collaboration, educational learning, training workers and giving guidance to workers, sales and marketing and manufacturing. And we are going to look today particularly at that education and learning, training and worker guidance space, and a little bit will stray into the sales and marketing space as well. But you can see here that businesses are really prioritizing virtual reality for these kinds of applications. And this is a very latest prediction in terms of the size of the market. So the enterprise virtual reality training market, so this isn't the whole market now, this is just for training and development alone, has grown from about $260 million in 2018 right the way up to $6.3 billion forecast for 2022. So that's a huge rate of growth. So why is that? Well, let's look at some of the benefits. So, and these are derived from a number of sources. A very big Accenture survey that was done again across a lot of companies looking at the benefits of virtual reality in learning and development, but also these figures are based on our experience, Virtuoso's experience of delivering these solutions to companies around the world. So I'll just pick out a few. Reduce post-training errors by up to 40%. So people doing the training and then going on and making mistakes because they've not remembered the training, generally a reduction in those numbers of mistakes by about 40%. Slashing operational and travel training costs by 69%. So because you're not flying people all over the world, traveling around, staying in hotels, that kind of stuff, you're saving an awful lot of money, and it's much more efficient in terms of how you do the training. You can actually train people a lot faster. It's about 40% faster to train somebody effectively using VR than it is actually doing the thing for real face-to-face. Improves engagement rates massively. So if you've ever done those kind of really tedious, boring internal quizzes on health and safety or compliance or whatever it might be that that everybody needs to learn and be aware of across an organization, you know, engagement rates up by 95% on training like that, just because it brings it to life and it makes it much more real and interesting for people. So really powerful set of stats, and companies are really taking note of this now and adopting VR quite significantly. And then if we look at what's going on behind the scenes to kind of create these benefits. So what this chart shows is in the left-hand column here, it's the percentage of what you learn from a training course or learning and development activity. What percentage do you retain after 2 weeks? So how much of it do you remember basically after 2 weeks? And then down the middle, we've got going right from the bottom where we look at reading, having somebody actually teach us with their words, looking at pictures, watching a movie and so forth, right the way up to the top of the chart, looking at doing the real thing itself. So actually going out and performing the action in the field, if you like. And then in the right hand column, we look at the nature of your involvement. So the things below that line are essentially passive things. You're sitting back and you're having the information given to you. The ones above the line are essentially the ones that are more proactive, that you're more involved in, you're engaged in, and you're actually doing things. And what we see is that as you come up through the chart, the amount that you remember, the percentage of what you remember grows massively. So at the top there, we're seeing 90% of what you learned you're retaining after 2 weeks. And this is where Virtuoso decided to play. So not quite doing the real thing, but simulating the real experience. So you get a huge benefit in terms of retention of that learning over the following 2 weeks and on into the future as well, compared to traditional forms of learning and development, which are down at the bottom of the chart. So it really does work, and it really makes a big difference. And this is the science behind it, essentially. However, and this is the reason why things changed rapidly after 2018, there are some problems. The first problem is that creating virtual reality applications and content up until kind of pre-2018 requires a lot of time. It requires specialist skills in terms of coding, design, graphics design, 3D modeling, and that has very high production costs as well to get that to a really high standard. And then even worse, if you want to make changes to that or you want to update it as you go along, very, very difficult and expensive to do. And then the second problem here is it's a very lonely experience. So anybody who's used VR or used VR previously to 2018 will know that you put a headset on and you're essentially in this little bubble. Basically, nobody can sort of come into your bubble, and you can't guide people through an experience. It's very hard to interact with them when they're in that kind of headset bubble. But what we're seeing is the market is exploding, but it's difficult to do it at a scalable size. So yes, you can create a very expensive application, a single-use application for one particular use case, but then scaling that up across multiple applications, multiple use cases and user groups across a large organization is prohibitively expensive. But this is what's changed. So VRtuoso essentially decided to address those problem statements. So it's the first virtual reality solution designed for enterprises that allows you to very quickly and easily create and deliver real-time VR experiences. So you don't need to have any kind of deep training. You don't need to be a coder. You don't need to be a graphics designer. You can create VR experiences and you can guide people interactively through them. Just complete this slide. And it's designed for people who aren't experts. So the learning curve is very, very small to get up to speed with this. And it's very easy to scale it across enterprises. So you can add new applications, you can update use cases, you can build things very, very quickly, and you can keep everything up to date all the time as well. So it's addressing that scalability problem as well. There's 3 versions of the product, and I'll talk about how it works in a little bit more detail in a minute. But essentially, there's a standalone unit which you can use in rooms such as lecture theatres, training rooms, that kind of thing, where everybody is going to be in the same physical environment. But what's happened with COVID over the last the last 7-8 months, essentially everybody's kind of moving towards our cloud-based products. So we have 2 cloud products. We have a public cloud product, so anybody can create an account on our platform and build their own VR experiences. And then we also have a private cloud solution as well for big enterprises that want to deploy into their own data centers as well. So how does it work? So to begin with, you source all of your content. So this could be 360 video, 360 images that you take yourself. It can be, we provide within the product, we provide a huge library of 360 video and image content that you can draw on as well. So a little bit like a Pixabay or whatever, where you get your 2-dimensional images or videos from. This is a virtual reality Pixabay. Using the camera itself, obviously, for 360 video and content that you want to create yourself, but also all of the existing content that you have in learning development as well. So any polls, any text that you've written, any photos or learning videos that you've used, all of that content can be used in the VRtuoso system. So what we do, we help you bring all that together in our platform. So you upload all of your content into the platform, and then you create sessions and stream the content out onto people's headsets. You can also access the content on pads and mobile devices, and if you like, on TV sets and large monitors as well. And this is what the experience looks like from a user perspective. So essentially, it is just PowerPoint, but for virtual reality. So if you're familiar with using PowerPoint and creating presentations in PowerPoint, this will feel very, very familiar to you. So you bring in your images, your video, your content. It's broken down into slides. So each slide is like a scene in the virtual reality world. And you essentially build a story for your piece of training using these slides. And each slide is either a VR, a 360 image, or it's a VR 360 video. So you can either play them put people into a video world, or you can put them into a still image, and then you can overlay content within that. So you can have polls, you can have text that pops up, you can give interactivity, so they can press buttons or pull levers or whatever it is you want them to do. So it's very, very rich as well. So think of that a little bit like the animation capabilities within PowerPoint. And then once it's live, you start the session and you guide the users through the experience. So essentially, it's just like I'm doing now and clicking through a presentation. You're guiding the users through the virtual reality experience that you've created with the slides. And you can see, for example, on here, there's all sorts of interactivity that addresses that isolation and loneliness that people used to feel when they were trapped inside a headset. So, for example, here you can see the three little red eyes. So there are 3 people logged into this particular training session, and I can actually see what they're looking at, where their gaze is directed within the world. And I can use this little white cursor here, the white circle you see by the forklift truck. I can guide the users using audio to look at particular things in the world that I want to talk to them about. So that's what the system looks like and how it works. And then let's look at the use cases. So as I said, we're focused initially on learning and development, so training, those kinds of things. So looking at everything from onboarding and induction training, health and safety training, immersion training, soft skills training, emergency skills, learning processes and procedures, and so forth. So really, really powerful. But what we've also found is that there's a big opportunity for sales, marketing, and engagement as well, type applications. So pre-construction visualization, virtual tours of places, exhibition stands, a day in the life of type propositions where you really bring it to life for the customer. So this is where VRtuoso has decided to focus its attention. And it's working really well. So these are a number of the corporate customers that we've acquired over the last 2 years around the world. So it's been a real kind of a roller coaster ride, picking up all of these big customers and working with them and delivering virtual reality applications and services for them. So what I thought I would do now is just quickly look at some of those, and then I'll talk as well about some of the ones that I'm leading right now. So BP were one of the earliest customers of VRtuoso. They bought it. After a couple of months after they bought the system and started using it, I was asked to go and interview them and find out what they were doing with it, just out of curiosity, really. And so we kind of knew the kind of use cases that were going to be popular with big organizations like BP. So I went to that conversation with BP thinking, well, this is going to be all about oil rigs. It's going to be about helicopter training safety. It's going to be about flying people out to oil rigs. It's going to be about fire safety on oil rigs, that kind of thing. But actually, when I spoke to them, they were using it for completely different things. I mean, this here is in terms of the shop layout at their garages and training the staff on how to lay out the shop and what the process should look like in the shop. But actually, the one that they started with, which really stunned me, was actually in the space of soft skills and leadership training. So what they were doing was training the managers, the middle and senior managers in BP in better kind of people management skills. So they had a scenario. They created a 360 video scenario in a boardroom in one of their offices. Where they had actors come in, and there was the boss, and there were the employees of the boss, and they were having a board meeting. And essentially, the 360 camera was placed at the table, so you were participating in the meeting. And what happened is, a few minutes into the meeting, a new joiner, a young lady, would come into the room. She was a new graduate that just joined the business, and she would sit down at the table. And what would happen would be that as the meeting continued, a number of the people around the table were using poor people skills. So essentially not treating this new person particularly well that had joined the meeting. So for example, the boss tells her to go off and make the coffee and that kind of thing. So the trainee managers were asked to identify all of these poor behaviors that were going on around the board table. And then they were asked to replay the scenario, and all the behaviors were corrected, so that they were the right kind of attitude and behavior that BP expected of its managers. So really, really interesting to see that, when I thought it was going to be about oil rigs and fires, it was about, soft skills training for people managers. So that's BP. Usefulness Porter Group are an Italian design company. design very high-end ladies fashion, and they've adopted the technology and been using it to essentially train their new joiners and their people that are coming into the business on the full range of the products and services, the products that they sell in their shops. So essentially it's basically like a virtual catwalk experience, so that you can learn all the different outfits and different types of outfits, the different combinations and all the rest of it, but delivered to you essentially as a virtual catwalk experience. So BT have been a huge adopter, early adopter for us as well. So this is a little training experience that was built looking at Magna Park, which is BT's distribution center. So again, familiarizing new joiners and people that haven't been to the facility before around what it can do and all the different processes and procedures and machinery that are in that facility. And then this was a very public one that was very visible, which you may have seen in the press. So this was the launch of 5G that BT did in Belfast last year. And essentially this was looking at the plans that Belfast Harbour, so Belfast Harbour were BT's customer for this, had in terms of developing the waterfront in Belfast. So there's the Titanic Museum, which you can see there, but there's a whole load of regeneration work that's going on around Belfast Harbour as well. And we were using VRtuoso to essentially bring that to life and also demonstrate the capabilities of 5G. So actually the virtual reality experience was being delivered over 5G handsets onto the headsets. And then these are some projects that I've been working on personally myself recently. So the top one, Pfizer. So Pfizer have adopted the on-prem, the private cloud version of VRtuoso. And what we're doing there is what's called defect training. So they have a big facility in Ireland called Grange Castle. And every year they typically bring about 30 to 40 graduates from around the world, new joiners to Pfizer, and take them through the process of what's called defect training. So they go through the whole production line and they look for the slightest blemish or mistake or contamination or anything being broken. They're absolutely meticulous about it. And what they want to do now is, instead of flying everybody to Grange Castle in Ireland, they want to just train them remotely in doing the defect detection. So I, of course, thought this was all about reducing air travel and reducing hotel costs. So when I was working with them on this, I said, well, what are the metrics we're going to use to measure the benefit that's being delivered for Pfizer? And I said, is it around reduction in travel costs, reduction in hotel costs, that kind of thing? And they said, well, that's kind of interesting. It's a bit of a byproduct, really. And I said, oh, so what's the main benefit then? And they said, well, at the moment, when we bring those 30 or 40 graduates through and we take them through the Grange Castle facility, we expose the facility to potential contamination, because you've got kind of 30, 40 sweaty graduates going through it, touching everything and poking stuff. And he said, every time we get caught with an incident of contamination, we get fined on average about $10 million. So that sort of changed the game for me completely, because I suddenly realized what the benefit for them was. Yes, it's great that they're not going to have to fly people around the world and all the rest of it, but actually this was a real kind of deep use case around avoiding fines and avoiding contamination in their facilities. Then the one at the bottom, I can't name this customer specifically because it's under NDA still, but this is a very large water company in the north of England. So they provide a huge number of millions and millions of homes with their water in the north of the UK. And what we're doing here is we're doing pump safety training. So they have a process called lockout and tag out. So whenever you need to maintain a pump, and these are very high pressure pumps, so the water in them is a very high pressure. If any of the water escapes, it can be very, very dangerous. So they have a process called lockout and tag out, which means how you shut down the whole facility. Like a whole pump room, so shut electrically all the pumps down, make sure all the water is vented from the system so that it's not under high pressure, then you can go in and do the maintenance. So what we're doing here is we're essentially creating that whole training experience in virtual reality so that they can train people much more effectively from all over the country in doing that, because at the moment they have to take them again to one particular place, one particular facility to do that training. And then this final example I'll talk about here Again, I can't say the name of the actual company because it's under NDA, but this is a very large organization, essentially funded by the government of Saudi Arabia. And what they're doing is building an entire new city on the edge of the desert next to the sea in Saudi Arabia. So literally, it's a well, it was a couple of years ago. It was just a completely just sand, essentially, next to the sea. But what they're doing is creating a future city. So it's a real city in the sense that many companies and people will live there and be based there, but actually it's a complete smart city. So it's super green, and it's super efficient, and it's kind of super smart city as well. So it's all connected, has the latest connectivity, the latest technology and capability built into it from the scratch. And so what we've been engaged to do for this Saudi Arabian government organization is to help them visualize the whole city in virtual reality so that they can bring business leaders, stakeholders, funders from around the world to the experience and actually help them to see what the facility looks like when it's created. A second use case we're working on as well at the moment is that the city doesn't look like this yet. It's essentially a construction site at the edge of the desert, but a lot of contractors from around the world are traveling to it, and they need to basically onboard all of those contractors with the onto the site before they arrive. So I think of it a little bit like Camp Bastion in Kandahar. So it's a little bit like that. It's almost like a huge town in itself, the construction site. And so people need to know where they can and they can't go, where the facilities are, what they should do in the event of an emergency, and all this kind of stuff. So again, we're producing onboarding training using virtual reality so that when contractors and builders from around the world come, we can train them very, very efficiently before they arrive. So the final thing to say is that we've also started to build up our distribution network around the world for this technology. So BT are a distributor, but so are all these organizations on here. So Samsung, PwC, Qatar Mobile in the Middle East. So it's really beginning to grow the adoption around the world as well. And just to finish and summarize, basically, Virtuoso, the whole point of it is enabling VR so that everybody can do it, and that it's simple to create these experiences and to deliver them, and that they're very effective in terms of improving the learning and the training that people get as a result of it.